Well, away from Russia's invasion of Ukraine, let's go to other stories making the rounds in the news today. North Korea conducted its longest range missile test yet today, firing a ballistic missile over Japan for the first time in 5 years. South Koreans watched a news report of the launch at a railway station in the capital, Seoul. The missile appeared to fly over Japanese territory before falling into the Pacific Ocean. In Japan, the government issued an alert warning its citizens to take cover and stay inside buildings. The launch also caused a temporary suspension of train operations in the north of the country. Pyongyang's latest launch drew condemnation from leaders in neighboring countries, from South Korea's President Yoon Suk-yeol to Japanese Prime Minister Mr. Fumio Kishida. Tokyo said that it took no steps to shoot the missile down. But Defense Minister Yasukazu said Japan wouldn't rule out counter-attack capabilities. The latest launch was Pyongyang's fifth in 10 days and comes a week after anti-submarine drills were held between the U.S., South Korea and Japan. Recent missile tests have drawn relatively muted responses from Washington, which is focused on the war in Ukraine, as well as other domestic and foreign issues. Washington has strongly condemned this most recent missile, however, calling the decision both dangerous and also reckless. We head to the United Kingdom, where British Prime Minister Liz Truss says the government is looking at long-term energy contracts with other countries, but had not yet signed any. Now, she also refused to rule out cutting benefit payments by less than soaring inflation to help fund her tax-cutting growth plan in what is likely to spark the next political rebellion over her economic plans. Truss and her finance minister, Kwesi Kwarteng, are racing to set out how they will pay for more than £40 billion. That's about $46 billion of tax cuts announced last month, sparking turmoil in financial markets, as they did not say how they would pay for them. Already, the government has been forced to reverse its plan to scrap the highest rate of income tax to appease Conservative Party lawmakers who saw it as a gift to the rich during a cost-of-living crisis.
Well, what I have said is, first of all, we will move forward on our own energy security. So that's more renewables here in the UK, it's more nuclear power here in the UK, and it's also moving forward faster with using North Sea facilities. But we are looking at long-term energy contracts with other countries because, as well as making sure we've got a good price, energy security is vitally important. And we never want to be in a position again where we're dependent on authoritarian regimes for our energy. That's why we're in the situation we are now. That's why many European countries are in the situation we are now. And that's why we're determined that we become more energy independent.
Hang on.
Well, I've not signed any deal, but what I'm saying is that Britain's energy security is vital, and what we will be doing is always looking for value for money. Of course we will, but it's important that we have that long-term energy security. And what's happened in the past is we've ended up being dependent on the global spot price, and we've seen the effect of that. We've seen the fact that people are facing bills of £6,000, and I never want Britain to be in that position again. Well, on the subject of benefits, we have not yet made that decision, and of course there will be discussions about the way forward on commitments like benefits, on how we deal with future budgets. But I'm very clear that going into this winter, we do need to help the most vulnerable. In addition to the energy price guarantee, we've also made sure the most vulnerable households have an extra £1,200, and this government will always help people get on in life whilst making sure the most vulnerable are protected.
Being Prime Minister.
I am. It's a challenging role. It's a challenging time. But what I am focused on is delivering for the British people.
Is it harder than you thought?
I came in with very clear expectations that this was a tough time for our country. But I'm prepared to do what it takes to get us through these difficult times, to get us through this difficult winter, and to come out stronger as a country.
Thank
you.
Very emphatic there, but away from the energy crisis, British Interior Minister Suella Braverman will set out plans today for new powers which would ban migrants across the English Channel from claiming asylum. The government has been under pressure to deal with the rising number of people making dangerous journeys, despite plans to deport those arriving illegally to Rwanda. More than 30,000 people have made the crossing in small boats so far this year, already surpassing last year's record. Government officials have warned the total could reach 60,000 by the end of the year. Braverman will use her speech to the governing Conservative Party's annual conference to commit to looking at a new legislative power so the government can deport those who come to Britain illegally. The UK's Conservative Party members have varied reactions to government plans to ban migrants across the English Channel from claiming asylum. Some delegates at the governing Conservative Party's annual conference welcome the plans, while others say it goes against the standards of the country. There are also mixed feelings from the delegates as to whether the government has managed to fully draw a line under the drama surrounding the now abandoned plan to abolish the top rate of income tax. The Home Office did not immediately respond to a request for comment.
I think it's a good idea to ban asylum itself, because that's a fundamental principle that applies worldwide. I think this country's got certain standards, world standards, and we've got to stick to those. Deterring people from making applications is perhaps another thing. The fact that they may enter illegally is not a particularly good reason for banning asylum.
Suella Braverman, is right in what she says. I mean, she's human. She will understand what is right and what is not right. But the person seeking to come here, because there are greener pastures here, and there are economic migrants, there are everything migrant. So you need to check each case, as it comes, and then make sure that you're following the right channel to do something. I'm sure the people will appreciate it when they're allowed into this country.
It is worth it, but it's too late. Everything that's happened in the last 30 years has been really ignoring this problem, and it hasn't gone away. In fact, it's got worse, hasn't it? Basically, when I saw a U-turn yesterday, I was so concerned for the government, I just got on a plane and flew to Birmingham and checked in last night. And let's see what happens. Well, my concern is that we're going back 30 years to the Conservative Party conference in 1998, where the Conservatives lost power for 15 years, and I don't want that to happen again.
Away from Britain, the death toll from Hurricane Ian has reportedly risen to nearly 100 in Florida as rescue personnel continue to search for survivors. Officials in the U.S. state have come under fire as critics allege residents in some hard-hit areas did not receive enough advance warning to evacuate. More than half of the deaths recorded are in Lee County, where Ian made landfall as a Category 4 hurricane. President Joe Biden is expected to visit Florida tomorrow. On Monday, he visited Puerto Rico, which was struck by Hurricane Fiona just days before Ian struck Florida, where he promised $60 million in aid to help the U.S. territory. The majority of the deaths, 54, have been reported in the Lee County, which includes the hard-hit areas Fort Myers, Sanibel, and Pine Island. While the death toll from Hurricane Ian already makes it one of the deadliest hurricanes in recent memory, it still pales in comparison to 2005's Hurricane Katrina, which killed more than 1,800 people. In the wake of the storm, officials in Lee County have faced questions about the timing of the evacuation order, which was issued on the 27th of September, less than 24 hours before Ian made landfall. Several other counties in the path of the incoming hurricane issued their own evacuation orders a day before. Local officials, as well as Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis, have defended Lee County's preparations for the hurricane. Approximately 450,000 homes and businesses remain without power across the state. This according to data from Power Outage US. And Indonesia's Soccer Federation today banned 2 officials from Arema FC for life over a weekend stadium riots that killed at least 125 people. The club was also fined 250 million rupiah. Erwin Tobing, the head of the association's disciple committee, says officials from World Football governing body FIFA and the Asian Football Confederation would also visit the country. It didn't give details. In one of the world's worst stadium disasters, hundreds of spectators were crushed as they tried to flee the overpacked stadium in Malanga East, Java on Saturday after police fired tear gas to disperse agitated fans of the losing home team, Arema FC, who had poured onto the pitch. Well, it was the closing stages of a soccer match in Indonesia's East Java province the evening of October 1, and the 29-year-old spectator Ahmed Niza Habibi said he had a gut feeling things were about to turn ugly. Soon after that, agitated fans of the losing home team poured onto the pitch, police firing tear gas on them. According to Habibi, he says, "Our eyes were blinded and our throats hurt so much." He said he saw a woman gasping for air from the tear gas. In Indonesia, where Rowdy Street protests are a regular event, police occasionally use tear gas to disperse crowds, but rarely at sport events. We've heard from the body FIFA stipulating no crowd control gas should be used at matches. And Choro Anam, a commissioner for Indonesian rights body Komnas HAM, told a news briefing that if gas hadn't been fired, maybe there wouldn't have been chaos. Football hooliganism and violence is not new in Indonesia. According to data from Save Our Soccer, a private football watchdog organization, it shows that 86 people have died in soccer-related violence in Indonesia since 1995. But the severity of this tragedy has shocked the nation, with the country seeking answers. The spotlight is on police, but experts say the true picture is more complicated. And as developing countries call out their more developed brethren ahead of the next climate summit in November, the United Nations Secretary-General has joined their cause. The high-level speakers at the climate talks in Kinshasa particularly called out rich nations for failing to honor a $100 billion per year funding pledge to developing countries, warning that fair finance was needed to avert the worst of the climate crisis. Dozens of ministers and senior delegates are in Democratic Republic of Congo this week for a final meeting before the COP27 climate summit in November, where more vulnerable countries hope to push for compensation for economic losses linked to climate catastrophes. Egypt, which is hosting COP27, is working on how to include this kind of compensation for so-called loss and damage on the formal agenda, a task complicated by industrialized nations' wariness of the liabilities they may face.
COP27 is critical, but we have a long way to go. Let's be clear, the collective commitments of G20 governments are coming far too little and far too late. The actions of the wealthiest developed and emerging economies simply don't add up. Taken together, current pledges and policies are shutting the door on our chance to limit global temperature rise to 2 degrees Celsius, let alone meet the 1.5 degree goal. We are in a life or death struggle for our own safety today and our survival tomorrow. And there is no time for pointing fingers or twiddling thumbs. It is time for a game-changing, quantum-level compromise between developed and emerging economies. The world cannot wait. On the central question of loss and damage, we know people and nations are suffering now. They need meaningful decisions now. Failure to act on loss and damage will lead to more loss of trust and more climate damage. This is a moral imperative that cannot be ignored, and COP27 must be the place for action on loss and damage. And at the same time, international financial institutions must overhaul their business model and approach to risk. Beyond pursuing their own drop-on-the-bucket initiatives, they must intensify their efforts to leverage the necessary massive increases of private finance as first investors and risk takers. On every climate front, the only solution is decisive action in solidarity. COP27 is the place for all countries, led by the G20, to show they are in this fight and in it together.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres there. Well, staying with climate change, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte had a bilateral meeting in Berlin today for climate discussions. Main topics are the cooperation between the two countries on renewable energies, including offshore wind power and hydrogen. According to a statement by the German government, Scholz and Rutte were to also discuss the 2022 United Nations Climate Change Conference and the Fit for 55 targets by the European Union to reduce net greenhouse gas emissions by at least 55% in 2030. Well, the European Parliament approved new rules today that will introduce a single charging port for mobile phones, tablets and cameras by 2024 in the European Union, a world first that is expected to affect iPhone maker Apple more than its rivals. The vote confirms an earlier agreement among EU institutions and will make USB-C connectors used by Android-based devices the EU standard, forcing Apple to change its charging ports for iPhones and other devices. The change had been discussed for years and was prompted by complaints from iPhone and Android users about having to switch to different chargers for their devices. Among big providers of electronic devices to European customers, Apple is expected to be among the most affected, but analysts also expect a possible positive impact because it could encourage shoppers to buy the company's latest gadgets instead of ones used without USB-C. Now, the deal also covers e-readers, earbuds and other technologies, meaning it may also have an impact on Samsung, Huawei and other device makers. EU lawmakers supported the reform with a large majority, with 602 votes in favour and only 13 against.
Today, we are replacing this pile of chargers with just this. The simplest solutions are often the best and most practical ones. And the simple solution each year will save thousands of tons of electronic waste, facilitate the reuse of old electronics, better consumer convenience, reduce unnecessary costs, and also help to save millions of euros. And that is why we are here today.
No, we will need to monitor the evolution of charging technologies. We will look at whether or not there is a need to improve consumer convenience, save costs, improve environmental performance. And that will allow us to consider extending the scope of devices covered if justified, addressing wireless charging technologies, but also assessing possible further unbundling of charging cables.
And the A's have it. Well, let's go on to other stories. At least 15 prisoners have been killed at a prison in Ecuador city of Latacunga. This information was provided by the National Prison Agency, which added that another 21 were injured in the latest incident of deadly jail violence in the Andean country. Officials say authorities are working on identifying the bodies, while Oswaldo Coronel, governor of the province, which includes Latacunga, told reporters security had been restored. According to Coronel, 14 of the 21 injured people have been evacuated to hospitals in the city of Latacunga. In July, 13 prisoners were killed at a prison in Santo Domingo, just 2 months after violence at the same institution killed 43 in May. Last year, 316 prisoners died during riots in various prisons across Ecuador. The government of Conservative President Guillermo Lasso attributes prison's violence to fights between gangs over control of territory and drug trafficking routes. The Inter-American Commission on Human Rights has said Ecuador's prison system is blighted by state abandonment and the absence of a comprehensive policy, as well as poor conditions for inmates. The country's prisons house about 33,500 people and are 11.3% beyond maximum capacity, according to official figures. Over in Haiti, police fired tear gas into crowds as thousands marched on the streets to protest against the government of Prime Minister Ariel Henry the day the school year was set to begin amid crippling national shortages. Footage showed a man being carried on a stretcher after suffering a leg injury and police firing ammunition into the air to disperse protesters. Gangs have been blocking the country's main fuel port in protest over a fuel price hike he announced last month, and the resulting shortages have forced hospitals to close or scale down, shutting transportation down and grounding daily activities to a halt. In a statement to the United Nations the week after announcing the price hike, Ms. Henry acknowledged the right of people to protest the high cost of living, but condemned organizers of looting, vandalism, and also of violence. Well, staying with Haiti, Secretary General Antonio Guterres has expressed deep concern about the health and safety of people there following the confirmation of 2 positive cases of cholera and multiple suspected cases in the capital, Port-au-Prince. The spokesperson for the Secretary General, Dujarric, said the United Nations is ready to deploy emergency response teams to support affected communities as soon as safe access is assured. Additional suspected cases are currently being investigated in the metropolitan area around Port-au-Prince, including 8 deaths from suspected cases. The cases were identified using the cholera surveillance mechanism established by the Haitian authorities and supported by the United Nations.
The Secretary General is deeply concerned about the health and safety of people in Haiti following the confirmation of 2 positive cases of cholera and multiple suspected cases in the capital, Port-au-Prince. The United Nations is ready to deploy emergency response teams to support affected communities as soon as safe access is assured and fuel supplies are unlocked. The Secretary General calls for an immediate, unfettered access on the ground to facilitate the delivery of fuel and for humanitarian purposes. Fuel deliveries have been blocked at the port since mid-September, which has disrupted not only daily life for Haitian people, but also the ability and the capacity of our colleagues on the ground and the international community to respond to a compounding crisis. In the current context of social unrest and insecurity, it is imperative that these teams be guaranteed safe access to at-risk areas, including where cases have been confirmed or suspected, to help mitigate the risk of a large or disruptive outbreak of the disease. Haiti's National Public Health Lab confirmed the cases of cholera on Saturday and as well as yesterday. Additional suspected cases are currently being investigated in the metropolitan area around Port-au-Prince, including 8 deaths from suspected cases. The cases were identified using the cholera surveillance mechanism established by the Haitian authorities and supported by the United Nations.
We continue in South Africa. More penguins have died from avian flu at the colony Cape Town's Boulders Beach, a popular tourist attraction and an important breeding site in the country, raising concerns for the species and for other seabirds. David Roberts, a clinical veterinarian at the South African Foundation for Conservation of Coastal Birds, said at least 28 out of around 3,000 penguins in the colony had died from the disease since the middle of August.
Fears are being raised for penguins at an important breeding site in Cape Town after a number of deaths from avian influenza. David Roberts, a clinical veterinarian, at the South African Foundation for the Conservation of Coastal Birds said at least 28 out of around 3,000 penguins at the Boulders Beach colony had died of the disease since the middle of August.
This is a continuation of the outbreak that happened last year, and it affects several different species of seabirds. And at the moment, we're quite concerned because the numbers of penguins that are being affected and dying from the disease is going up.
South African environmental authorities said earlier this month that this strain of the highly pathogenic disease was similar to one detected last year amongst a range of wild seabirds. The Boulders Beach colony is home to the only penguin species that breeds on the continent, but their numbers have been falling sharply for years due to loss of habitat and declining fish stocks.
It's not a large number of birds that are affected at this point compared to the approximately 3,000 penguins in Boulders Beach. It's just over 10 that we found, but we don't know where we are in that trajectory.
Dr. Alison Koch is a marine biologist at South African national parks.
We've had 25 penguins affected by the avian flu, and of a colony of about 3,000, the numbers are still low, but because the virus is contagious between birds, we're doing everything that we can to reduce the viral load and transmission rate between the penguins.
To identify and remove sick birds from the colony, South African scientists perform tests or diagnose penguins on their symptoms. Sick birds are then euthanized and, along with dead ones, are cremated in an attempt to reduce the spread of the disease.
Quantum physicist Anton Zeilinger said he was kind of shocked when he got the phone call today to say that he, alongside scientists Alain Aspect and John Closer, had won the 2022 Nobel Prize in Physics. The awards were given for their advances in quantum mechanics on the behavior of subatomic particles, opening the door to work on supercomputers and encrypted communication. And the award-giving body said their experiments with entangled photons, establishing the violation of Bell inequalities and pioneering quantum information science. Well, the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences said the laureates Aspect, who is French, Closer American, and Zeilinger Austrian, enabled further fundamental research and also potentially cleared the way for new practical technology.
What is awarded this year are experimental investigations that have revealed, so to say, deep secrets in nature, and in particular show that the quantum physics theory is correct, even in cases where it is hard to understand. And in that sense, it has opened new ways of understanding nature. But this has also given practical applications. Quantum mechanics or quantum physics is used in a lot of modern technology. Think of all the semiconductor things that we are using. It's really based on that. And we are now experiencing what is sometimes called a second revolution in quantum physics, which will show new applications in the future. This has to do with quantum computing, building computers which are built on these deep understanding of quantum physics. And such computers, when they come, and I think they will have an enormous computing power, which means that you can attack new problems and solve new problems.
Well, staying with innovation, French fries are going high-tech thanks to a laboratory in California. Mr. Robotics in Pasadena has started rolling out its Flippy 2 robot, which cuts the human out of a big chunk of the cooking process in fast food restaurants. A huge robotic arm, similar to those seen in car plants and manufacturing, powered by cameras and artificial intelligence, does everything from taking frozen French fries, onion rings and other foods from the freezer, cooks them in oil, then deposits them ready for serving. The machine can cook several meals with different recipes simultaneously, removing the need for catering staff, speeding up the process at drive-thrus. Flippy was in development for 5 years before recently becoming commercially available It took painstaking effort not just to engineer and code, but to learn the intimacies of the kitchen. The Flippy name comes from the original machine designed to flip burgers, but once the team at Mr. Robotics had finished that model, they realized from speaking to restaurants that there was way more of a bottleneck around the frying station, particularly late at night, as the originally Flippy sits in the corner of the room, almost watching the newer model take its glory. Mr. says Flippy 1 is on sabbatical. A huge fleet of Flippy 2s busily cook hundreds of French fries and onion rings that are timed to the second.
Meet Flippy 2. Flippy 2 is our AI-powered robotic fry station. It installs overnight and takes over the entire tasks of cooking fried food for restaurants. When an order comes in through the restaurant system, it automatically spits out the instructions to Flippy. Takes a frozen product, fries it for the precise amount of time, and puts the finished product in the end. It does it faster, more accurately, more reliably, and happier than most humans do it. So this technology utilizes a whole bunch of computer vision. There's cameras throughout the system, including right here we have these food identification cameras. The cameras not only guide the robot and tell it exactly where it is in space and how to move through this area, but also identifies the food type, and it knows the recipe for each one. The task that the humans are most happy to offload are tasks like the fry station. And so it's the task it's the position that's often hardest to fill, it's hardest to retain. And so it really doesn't take anything away from restaurant workers. In reality, they're delighted to have the help so they can do other things. What you can see here is we have locations in San Diego for Jack in the Box, many throughout the Midwest with White Castle, several on the West Coast with Cali Burger. And these are just some of the robots we've got deployed in the world today, where our engineers are keeping eyes on, making sure that everything works well. When we put a robot into a location, the customers that come up and order, they all take pictures, they take videos, they ask a bunch of questions, and then the second time they come in, they seem not to even notice. It's just very taken for granted.
So somewhat chips making chips. Well, that's our program this evening. Thank you for watching. I'm Millicent Walker. Bye for now.